This week on Quadriga, Italy's debt crisis, the euro under threat. Now it's Italy that's in the crosshairs of financial markets. Its stock prices have plunged on fears that the Greek virus could spread from Europe's margins to its centre. Market fears over Italy's public debt have added to the agitation in Brussels, where lawmakers are still grappling with the crisis in Greece. So will Italy also need a bailout? And is there any rescue fund big enough to tackle the job? Your host is Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga, the international talk show on DWTV. Well, those two questions are ones that we want to discuss right now with three people who have been covering the crisis for German, international and Italian media.
Joining Melinda in the studio this week, Ulrike Herrmann is opinion page editor for the Berlin-based newspaper The Taz. She started her career in banking before taking up journalism, and she was previously business editor at The Taz. Quentin Peel is international affairs editor for the Financial Times. He has also served the paper in a series of foreign posts, including European community correspondent and Brussels bureau chief, Moscow correspondent and chief correspondent in Germany. Angelo Conte is responsible for the business section of the Trento-based newspaper l'Adige. He also reports for a variety of German media, including the wire service DPA and the newspapers Tagesspiegel and Berliner Morgenpost.
Quentin Peel, how grave is the situation in Italy?
Well, I think it is serious. There's always been this problem of this huge state debt hanging over the Italian economy, and yet they've lived with it for a very long time. And I think the fundamental problem in Italy is, at least it's not as immediate as the market seem to think it is. They are coming to terms with the problem. Their primary deficit is really quite controlled. And so it's more the panic, the sense of contagion and panic coming from the rest of the Eurozone than that Italy is a crisis now.
Angelo Conte, the rest of the Eurozone, there are in fact some pretty big differences between Italy and the other debt-ridden countries, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, aren't there?
Yes. For instance, the wealth of the private families in Italy is high. We have 8,000 billions euro that in the hands of the private families, and also the problem is, and the banks are all more solid than they are in other countries, and I think the problem is that panic contagion has so made this problem of the state debt and business a little bigger.
And as I understand it, a lot of the debt is also held by Italians themselves, not by foreign investors who might be more likely to take flight. 50%
of our debt is in the hands of the Italians, and so I think that there will be a kind of solidarity in Italy, that a lot of families will be buying the bonds of Italy in next future in order to help the state. I think they will also try to do it in order to avoid the problem of the growth and of economics in Italy, a big problem for Euro.
But can I come in? Because there is, of course, there is a real problem in Italy. Yes. One, the government is seen as rather dysfunctional. They're squabbling amongst themselves, so that's a problem. But secondly, there is still a huge amount of Italian debt held outside Italy. I mean, this puts Greece, Portugal, Ireland into complete shade. It's a very big problem for the banks in Europe. I mean, look at the French banks have seen their shares come crashing down in the last few days, precisely because they're holding an awful lot of Italian debt. So Italy has got to come to terms with its fundamental problems. Yes. It's just that maybe it didn't have to happen now, but it has happened.
Let's come back to the government dysfunctionality in just a second. But Ulrike Herrmann, indeed, this problem is at a level in terms of size that, of course, dwarfs the debt of the other countries that have been causing so much concern. Is Italy ultimately too big to bail out?
Well, yes, it is too big to bail out with the rescue package. That's just not possible. But it would be possible to bail out Italy or Spain by introducing a Eurobond. I mean, once you have a bond that's issued by Europe as a whole, and investors can no longer differentiate whether it is a bond issued by Germany or a bond issued by Italy, then, you would no longer have this attacks by investors against one country. And that would help Italy in the long run if it was just protected by a Eurobond.
How likely do you consider the worst-case scenario that Italy would need a bailout?
Well, I think that in the long run, perhaps not in the short run, but in the long run, Italy will need a bailout because it has one more fundamental problem that was not yet mentioned, and that is that the economic growth is very, very low. It's just 1% at the moment, and in the last 10 years, Italy grew only by 2.5% in the whole decade. Now, that is very, very low, and that's due to the fact that the wages in Europe, they drift apart. For example, since 2000, the wages in Germany didn't rise at all, or hardly, whereas in Italy, the wages rose by a third. So you can imagine that the Italian economy is no longer competitive. Now, and that is really endangering the euro. Because, it's hard to see how Italy, that's something Quentin Peel mentioned, should ever pay back its debts if the country or the economy does not grow.
And Floccanti, now the government has rushed through an austerity program to try to calm the markets, but won't it depress growth even further? How can Italy possibly hope to get growth moving with these kind of cuts?
I think this austerity plan is not so so big as we see it from outside, because this 38 billion euro will be achieved in 2 or 3 years, and the problem is that each family will pay 1,000 euro in 2 years maximum. This is not so high a price for such a plan. I think the problem is that we have to invest more money in research and development in Italy, and we have to make the enterprise a little bigger, because 95% of the enterprises in Italy have less than 10 employees. It means that we cannot export with such a structure of enterprises, and in fact, as a matter of fact, is the export average of Italy 337 billion euro. In Germany, is almost 1,000 billion euro. That shows that we are not so little in comparison to Germany, but our economics is not so strong.
Quentin Peel, the austerity program, as I said, a rushed effort to calm the markets. Is it good enough to do that?
Well, the markets are a law unto themselves, but the truth is it is a bit of a cynical exercise. It is postponing the pain until another government is elected. Exactly. I would very much like to see Mr. Tremonti, who, after all, in his previous life, specialised in tax avoidance, being the finance minister who actually really clamps down on tax avoidance in Italy. There are a lot of very fundamental structural questions to be dealt with in Italy, precisely to make the country more competitive. That's what's needed, and the labour market needs to be reformed perhaps too. Lot of red tape that Italy has accumulated. But the political problem is always the fundamental problem, and these things have been very difficult to get through before. And then I'd like to pick up a little bit perhaps on Ulrike's proposal for Eurobonds, because that is a fascinating, if you like, long-term solution. How on earth do you get that through the German political establishment?
A very good question.
I want to come right back to that, but first we have a very short look at the markets, as you say, a law unto themselves, and why they believe that Italian policymakers don't take the problem seriously enough.
The Dolce Vita has its price. Bella Italia has a whopping 1.8 trillion euro mountain of debt, the biggest in Europe in comparison to the country's GDP. Markets took it all in stride until recently, but doubts that Italy's politicians are serious about austerity have sent tremors through the markets. The Italian Senate passed a drastic new budget, but only after Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi had mocked his own finance minister. As their dispute peaked, Finance Minister Giulio Tremonti said, "If I fall, Italy falls. Then so falls the euro. It is a chain." And he warned that politicians can't afford to make any more mistakes.
Angelo Conte, earlier this week, a lot of people were asking, where is Silvio Berlusconi? Is he, in the end, very much to blame for the whole mess?
Well, I think we cannot say that one man is responsible for the mess that we experience in Italy today. But we must also say that he faces not the problem with the necessarily strength that we need in this moment, and he tried to see himself already in the next elections. So he experiences that such a plan is painful for his image in Italy. We will try to, when we consider the austerity plan, we have to consider that almost 20 billion euro comes from tax expenditures cuttings. That means that there are no structural issues that in this plan. So it will be difficult to come out of this situation if we don't face up also a problem that a large part of Italy is under control of the mafia, Camorra, and 'Ndrangheta in the south of Italy, and this causes a weaker growth of the economics in the south of Italy that is, in comparison to Portugal and Spain and Greece, weak. Like these economics.
Ulrike Herrmann, coming back now to your mention of the Eurobonds, how much is this an Italian problem or a Portuguese problem, an Irish problem, a Greek problem, and how much is it a European problem? This whole lack of trust, isn't that ultimately a lack of trust in Europe's ability to find a comprehensive long-term solution?
Well, yes, I think that Europe as a whole has two problems. One problem is what I mentioned, that the wages drift apart, so that if Germany, for example, tries to cut its wages to have better competitive advantages within the Eurozone, then Germany hurts all its neighbors. And if this continues, in the long run, even France will drop out of the euro. So this is really dangerous, and Europe must understand that it is not just an issue of having low deficits on the state level, but that you need much more cooperation with regard to wages, to taxes, and that's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, we need a completely new financial structure, and the Eurobond is one part of that. Because, I mean, how can it be that the rating agencies still give a AAA to the United States, despite all its problems? Yeah, and the euro is so much under attack. And that's because, it is not possible for the individual European governments to control the issue of their bonds. And that would somehow change if we had a Eurobond. Then it would be the European Central Bank would have the same kind of standing as the US Fed, and that's central for the solution.
Quentin Peel, European policymakers throughout this whole crisis have arguably constantly reacted too little and too late. Do you see any sign that minds are now getting focused finally with Italy in the crosshairs?
I think minds are very focused, but I think that they're having a real difficulty dealing with two things at once, the immediate crisis and the long-term solution. Yeah. Because they're trying to make the long-term solution work along the lines perhaps that Ulrike's talking about is exactly what's spooking the markets today. So you have a real tension between...
Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, one of the things is that the reason why Greece borrowed too much, Italy's borrowed too much since the euro was launched is that they've been borrowing at very low interest rates, held down in a way by Germany. So you've got to have a deal in the longer term where those interests do actually move, are kept apart. That means that the private creditors must take responsibility for their lending. But if they're going to take responsibility, take a haircut on their loans to Greece or Portugal or wherever, that is actually spooking the markets today, and they're all running away from the markets. So you have a great tension between those two things. In the long run, I think we do know where Europe's got to go. Very difficult to get there. Europe needs something like a European monetary fund to actually provide finance for those who need saving. But to have a European monetary fund requires a new European treaty. And that is something everybody is scared like hell of.
Ulrike Herrmann, this famous haircut, we talk about it just about every second week on this program. One of the big sources of disagreement throughout the crisis, how do we involve private creditors? How do we involve the banks? Should it be voluntary? Should it be mandatory? Interestingly enough, one of Germany's biggest bankers came out this week saying that an orderly restructuring of debt would not be the catastrophe that many people have been painting it. Is he right?
Well, you know, his idea was we have the catastrophe now, with Italy being affected. Now that the catastrophe is here, we can have a haircut involving the private banks. I mean, so, you know, he just assumed that the catastrophe had happened anyway. But I think, I mean, what is interesting about his proposal is that it shows that the banks are ready to accept a haircut and to accept losses. But I think that if you really wanted to have a haircut, as he suggested, costing 50 billion euros to the banks, you'd have to have a Eurobond at the same time. I mean, because, you know, I think that he underestimates the dangers of his proposal. I think that there is still the danger that the other countries like Spain or Italy would come under attack. And I think that if you wanted to have a haircut involving the banks, you would need a Eurobond so that the investors can no longer speculate against single countries. I think that's logical.
And there's no way that a Eurobond in today's political climate in Germany is ever going to be approved by the Bundestag, is it?
Yeah, that's the problem. And I think Germany is one of the main causes for this euro crisis, and not only because we keep our wages down, but also because we do not accept any responsibility for the other countries. But I think that you would have to explain to the Germans that a Eurobond would be profitable for them as well, because, you know, a large Eurobond market would be so liquid that the interest rates, I think, would be very, very low. Germans always have this idea, oh, then we have to pay high interest rates. I think that's not true.
And Germany is such a dominant economy in the European economy that actually it would also be very good for Germany, which has been the irony of the euro all along. Yeah. Germany was probably the least enthusiastic about launching the euro, and yet it's probably benefited more than anybody.
I agree.
Beneficiary. Ulrike Herrmann mentioned the prospect that the other countries could come under even more attack if there were to be a haircut. No one, of course, has done more to publicize the notion that the entire financial system could come grinding to a halt in the event of a haircut than the ratings agencies. European policymakers are now calling for a much closer look at their role in the crisis.
Moody's, Standard & Poor's and Fitch, 3 US ratings agencies, can sway the fates of entire nations. Moody's downgraded Ireland's credit to junk status this week. The agencies have turned it and Portugal into pariahs for international investors. Both countries have been relying for months on the EU Rescue Fund. EU Justice Commissioner Viviane Reding says it's time to smash the cartel and suggested Europe might want to create its own ratings authority. Other EU leaders don't go quite so far, but Internal Market Commissioner Michel Barnier says that at the very least, countries currently relying on rescue funds should be temporarily exempted from the agency's scrutiny.
Angelo Conte, do people in Italy see it as a victim of mercurial, dictatorial ratings agencies and speculators?
When we read the newspaper, it's not so. We can be that someone says, okay, we are under attack because the rating agencies are not good people and come from USA, and maybe they want to smash the euro and also the Italy. But we are conscious that we have our own problems. We have to do our homeworks, and the rating agencies are only a part of the problem, are not the cause of the problem, because our state debt comes not from the rating agencies, but from ourselves.
Quentin Peel, what is it about the ratings agencies? You talked about the markets being a law unto themselves. What's going on here? They made some big mistakes before the financial crisis began in 2008. Is this all about compensation? Is this just basically all self-interest?
Well, I think the rating agencies are by no means perfect. We saw that. They were far too optimistic at the beginning of the financial crisis, giving all sorts of junk investments good status, and now they're being far too pessimistic. But I think the problem is that we're paying much too much attention to the rating agencies, that people like not just the banks who've actually given up their risk assessment to the rating agencies, but people like the European Central Bank are paying huge amounts of attention to them. Now, let's be clear about one thing. There are 3 big rating agencies. They're all based in America, but one is owned by French interests, so they're not entirely American operations. But I think that the problem is more, as I say, on the other side, that we need to actually downgrade the amount of attention that people are paying to these assessments, which are no better than I suspect a bunch of journalists could do.
Ulrike Herrmann, do you agree with that? And how could we do that? What are the structures and rules we could put in place to take some of that attention away?
Well, I really agree, because, for example, the rating agencies took note of the fact that Greece was somehow bankrupt at exactly the time when that was mentioned by the newspapers.
It was glaringly obvious. Black is black.
Yeah, exactly. So, they were not at all quicker or more far-sighted than ordinary journalists. So it's really not to be seen what the special use of rating agencies is. But just as Quentin Peel said, the problem is that when it comes to the to Basel II, which regulates the equity that banks need, it is all based on the ratings of the rating agencies. So, and as long as we do not change Basel II, and as long as the equity of banks is based on the rating agencies, nothing will change. So, and if you want to have another system, that would mean that you would have to raise the equity banks need. And that, of course, would somehow cause a political storm among the financial markets. But I think that's necessary.
And what about now in the short term, Angelo Conte? Do we need a European ratings agency? Would that really help?
I think it's not possible in the short term to create a European rating agency, because you need a lot of time, people, and also standing for this agency. So I think it's better that the Europeans, politicians, or decide rapid and fast what they want to do with the European currency, because the problem is politics and not only economics in the moment.
Quentin Peel, this proposal to exempt countries that are getting rescue fund support from scrutiny by the agencies, would that help?
No, I don't think it would. I think it's the other side that needs to be dealt with, that we're paying too much attention to what they say. Exempting those countries, I think, would, in a peculiar way, just create more uncertainty.
So what structures and rules would you see as...
Well, I think Ulrike puts her finger on it partly, that the banks... Let's go back to it. This is hugely still a banking crisis that we're dealing with. And the banks need to recapitalize. And that's very expensive. I think we need possibly to have some more bank failures. I think that some of these banks have been allowed to be kept going with taxpayers' money, creating enormous moral hazard, and they're still thinking like this, that they won't be allowed to fail. We have to create a market somehow where banks can fail without creating global meltdown.
Ulrike Herrmann, is the Italy problem big enough to split the Eurozone, to bring the euro down?
Yes, in the long run, yes. I mean, the problem with all these euro crises we are dealing with now is that are the shortcomings of the past we are dealing with. But while we are still trying to somehow get around these problems, new problems build up. And as I said, the main problem is that the wages drift apart, and that not only Italy, but even France in the long run could be pushed out of the euro. And no one deals with this problem at the moment. So while we are still fighting against the crisis at the moment, the next crisis already builds up. And that's, I think, the main problem.
But would you not then go as far as the Chancellor, Frau Merkel, goes in saying if the euro fails, Europe fails?
Well, yeah, that would be true. Yeah.
And Angelo Conte, a lot of the press in Germany are starting to write obituaries for the euro. I saw one headline, "Rest in peace," with the death date given as 2012. Are you writing articles like that for your newspaper?
No, I wouldn't write that. I think I think that euro will be our currency also in the future because we have no chance.
As an Englishman who doesn't actually therefore have the euro at home, let me say it is the most fantastic invention. It has been an enormous success, but it lacks the full toolkit, and that's what's got to be created now, the full toolkit to make it work properly. That means a much more integrated Europe, and that is another big political step.
And we'll have lots of opportunities to discuss it in the future. Thank you very much for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you next time.